Hello everyone, it's Vince Wilson again, and welcome back to my critiquing of the 2015 reboot, remake, whatever you want to call it, of Jeff the Killer. The last time we left off, we had finished the first chapter. I was not very impressed. It was very rushed, exposition heavy, and the main characters came off as flat and very one-dimensional. The attempts at, you a back and forth verbiage between the two fell flat for me, and it kind of came off as cringy. But we'll see if this chapter, the second chapter, endears us to them in any fashion. Randy, Keith, and Troy. Jeff and Leo looked over and saw three boys outside, two of which were riding around in circles on the Woods brothers' bikes. They would spin them around and then jump off, letting the bikes crash onto the pavement, just to stand them up and ride them again. The two boys riding the bikes were both slim in build, while a heavier boy stood on the sidewalk, drinking a Red Bull and watching. Jeff and his brother made their way towards the doors of the video store when the fat kid saw them coming. Jeff couldn't hear what he said to his two friends, but he made some sort of gesture while shouting, and the other two boys dumped the bikes where they lay, and walked towards the sidewalk directly towards the two brothers. "Those your bikes?" one of the boys asked as Jeff and Leo entered the summer heat. "Yeah, why are you riding them?" Leo asked sharply. "We just saw them there, man. Relax. Figured that someone just left them out for us." Same boy responded, as his two friends joined him at either side. Jeff, determined to make a good start here, tried to change the course of this confrontation. "Well, they're ours. We just moved here about a week ago. We live over on Fairmont Avenue, a few blocks from here. We're just checking out the neighborhood." Jeff hoped that a civil tone could turn things around, but he could tell by the insolent look on this kid's face this was a difficult gamble. "Ah, good for you. You moved somewhere," the fat kid remarked. "Oh yeah, Troy," the first boy spoke. "They moved into that piece of shit house with the gravel driveway. I was wondering who would move into that place." "Well, Randy, now we know," the big kid, apparently named Troy, replied. Jeff, still trying to salvage the conversation, tried peaceful banter one more time. "Okay, so you're Troy and you're Randy. Well, I'm Jeff and this is my brother Lee. We just moved here from New Orleans." "You ain't in New Orleans now," the third boy, who just decided to speak, remarked. "Yeah, and who the fuck said you could call us by our names?" Randy asked, that insolent, privileged smile never leaving his face. I'm gonna comment on this after I'm done reading this minor passage. Jeff smiled and responded to Randy. "Well, I guess I could have called you a fucking asshole, but I figured I would give you the benefit of the doubt." At that moment, a flare of rage replaced that smirk that rested on Randy's face throughout the entire exchange. The other two boys, Troy and the still the unknown third member of his band, still, sorry, seemed to be momentarily struck silent. Perhaps they were used to being stood up to. "Oh, I'm sorry. Was that language too adult for you?" Jeff asked. "And you, quiet boy. We know this isn't New Orleans," Jeff stated to the slim kid that reminded him of his geographical location. "Because if this was New Orleans, you three would have already gotten your asses kicked for touching someone else's shit." Okay. Oh, well, again, I think I can keep going before I voice off on my criticisms. The slim kid looked back and forth between his two friends. Randy, Randy, clearly the leader of the two, leader. I don't know why I keep inserting words. I apologize. I'm very bad at reading things out loud. Clearly, the leader seemed to know what to say. "Keith, are you gonna let this little bitch talk to you like that?" Jeff knew this part, and while he wanted badly to stalk Randy and his pals around, a real concern suddenly invaded his mind. If he and Leo got into a fight in their first week in this new neighborhood, their parents would freak. He could practically hear it now, and while things had been far from perfect in their home, even after the move, there was a peace that fallen over the family, and Jeff, fighting his urges, decided to do his best to keep it. Okay, there's a fair amount of things I need to unpack there. The very flat characterization of the bullies, Troy, Keith, and Randy, where they're just assholes with no redeemable traits whatsoever. I've seen this done many times before in, a lot of literature done by Well, I'll call it what it is. Fan fiction, basically. I've seen it done a lot of fan fiction, where people who don't know how to make likable characters, or they're failing in writing likable characters, or they want you to take the side of someone who themselves aren't that likable. What they do is that they make everyone around them worse people, because then they feel that you're more likely to connect with the people that are being antagonized in that situation. And the problem with that is, if I am not invested in these characters, the Woods brothers, the protagonists of the story, I am not the least bit interested in their plight. And I'm not interested in their plight because I haven't had enough time to really uh, I haven't had enough time to really get a good grasp of their character. Like, I think what's supposed to be implied here is that Jeff has a bit of a mean streak. Like it says, like, oh, he knew this, like, as in he's been in a few fights or something, and it doesn't really show because we don't really know. Like, there was no build up to this. I'll just say that there was no real build up to this. Like, this is supposed to be some sense of escalation here, but it doesn't come in contrast to what was set up before, because nothing was set up before. Like, the story needs to start off smooth and simple. It needs to start off in a, kind of calm, and gradually builds up, becomes a little tense, and then we get to this point. I said it before in my first video that what should have been done is that this first chapter should consist of them moving in and getting situated in the neighborhood and trying to engage other people within the neighborhood, and then we see how the people around them kind of treat them for being outsiders and being, of lower class and lower social standing, and then that would give us a clear indication that this neighborhood is indeed fake, as these kids claim. It's rich and posh and phony. But we're supposed as it is now, we're supposed to just take them on their word. And if it really hasn't set in with the reader that what they're saying is true, if it hasn't really set in with us, and if we aren't allowed to come to that conclusion ourselves before they do, then we aren't really invested in what happens with them as a consequence to the conclusion that they came to. Now, again, I think it could have been done a much better. Like, the first chapter should lull us into this neighborhood, like basically get us used to this neighborhood, and then you introduce the bullies, who they try to, that Jeff and Leo try to engage with, and they're outwardly antagonistic. And one more thing about Keith and Troy and Randy that I find kind of perplexing in terms of how they're written right now. The idea is that they are extremely privileged kids who are used to getting their way because their family are very well off, their families are very well off, and they have high social standing. But it rings hollow because their characterization isn't really consistent with a bully who would have that kind of mentality ingrained in him. And when I say that, I mean, I don't know, like, to me, one of the first things that should have came out of Keith's mouth, well, who's the leader? Randy's mouth, when Jeff decides to mouth off at them, would be something along the lines of, "Do you know who my dad is? My dad can buy and sell you." Like, I don't think Benning understands that his characterization. He's trying to keep these characters within the spirit of the original story, I think. But the way that he's written their upbringings now, that it's basically changed it. That now their families are rich, and that's why they get away with everything they do. And that, I think the idea was that would explain away how they're able to essentially cause all this trouble and still not see any repercussions for it. But it doesn't fit with how they act. Like, when I think of a character who is privileged and affluent, so for basically simple, what was it called? Affluenza. Is that what they call it? But yeah, basically someone who is very wealthy and comes from a wealthy family and can do whatever they want to do and get away with it. I would assume that the first thing he would do was flaunt that fact, and he would basically threaten to fire Jeff, and maybe that is what keeps Jeff from lashing out. Like as it stands, and oh well, if Jeff fights this kid, he's going to get in trouble with his parents. His parents are, as the story makes it clear, are shallow socialite assholes. So I don't give a fuck there. Like that one thing kind of hinges on you caring about Jeff and Leo enough to to dread the idea of them getting into trouble with their asshole parents. And the problem is, I don't care about them because their characters are flat and non-existent and wholly defined by their discontent for the environment that they're currently residing in. Like I know people, I don't want to pull out the Twilight card, but this kind of reminds me of how kind of character that Bella Swan had, in that she, for some portion, had no character, and she was someone who was solely defined by her reactions to things. She exists to react to things purely, and that's kind of what I'm getting from the Woods brothers as characters. They are flat and kind of one-dimensional, and we're supposed to sympathize with them because the things that are happening to them are bad. It doesn't work that way. But let's continue. I've kind of bloviated enough. Oh, crap, I think I accidentally scrolled up. Jeff looked over the three very well dressed, very privileged looking kids from the privileged looking suburban kids before them and dismissed them. You guys are boring. Come on, Leo. Let them continue their play date without us. Leo laughed at that horrible quip and followed behind his brother towards the bikes. However, Randy and his little gang of would-be toughs would have none of that. They moved to block Jeff and his brother once again. Again, like, I don't know. I just can't envision them trying to intimidate them through brute force when they're come from a well-off family. Like, don't you think it would have made more sense if they were just, I don't like when I think of Randy from the original story, I thought that he was just some kind of like a kind of southern kid who was just like very like, or just something out of a Stephen King book. We don't, or something just like of low income and like probably has a shitty family and they probably got their guns from their parents' house and something like that. Here it's like these kids are come from a wealthy family and they know it and they're very cognizant of their privilege. So I would think that they would use that to get what they want instead of outwardly threatening people. It doesn't make sense to me. Where are you going, pussy? Randy asked. William, sorry. However, well, none of that. They moved to block Jeff and his brother once again. Where are you going, pussy? Randy asked, shoving Jeff. Jeff could tell the shove had no real conviction. Randy was trying to figure him out, seeing where his buttons were. He pushed harder eventually, but Jeff swallowed the slowly building anger within him once more. Leo took a bit more exception to the shove. We're going to your mom's house, and me and my brother saved up a couple dollars from doing chores when we hear she doesn't charge much. At the words out, as the words left Leo's mouth, Randy only appeared to register a small portion of it. Randy Hayden had grown up in Montville. Oh, great, more exposition. That's great. That's wonderful writing, exposition, where you just tell us about their upbringing rather than having it reflected in their actions and body language and kind of explained to the main character. I don't know. It's yeah, whatever. Growing up in Montville, his father made was a partner at a local firm that made a lot of money, something that Jeff would soon come to learn. Randy and his friends, while the same age as Jeff, had grown up in very different circumstances. They were used to being listened to. They were used to being feared. Randy was the target of the insult. Just stood there. It was actually Troy, the fat kid, who stepped forward. Fist balled, eyes squinted in anger. Who are you talking to? Who you talking to? Troy shouted, and took a wild swing at Liu. Liu, well, who was in better shape in that spar with Jeb a time or two during his time spent boxing, was able to avoid the punch, but just barely. Had that been all, it may have once again ended there. Troy was clearly taken by surprise at Liu's speed, actually didn't attempt another punch. However, these were bullies, kid that ran in pack for a reason. The skinny one, Keith, stepped around and threw a punch that connected with the left side of Leo's face. Jeff had had enough. He had been shocked at how quickly this evolved into blows, even though he expected it from the start. When he'd first met Randy and his friends, he had been curious. From there, he developed an annoyance with them slowly that annoyance evolved into anger. Well, yes, that, need to give us a summary of things we already read, narrator. However, upon seeing Leo punch, seeing a small trickle of blood from his brother's lip, upon seeing that smug look of satisfaction on Keith's face, that anger that Jeff felt suddenly exploded into a rage that he never felt before in his life. Jeff Woods did not hesitate. He stepped forward, his feet automatically falling in the correct stance he learned from boxing classes his father once enrolled him to, and delivered a powerful right to Keith's face. The skinny boy had no time to register shock or pain. The punch caught him by surprise, his knees buckled. Keith went down on the ground in a heap of confusion and dawning fear. Randy, the so-called leader here, was almost too shocked. Well, when you say leader, like, fucking nothing here really indicate that Randy was, in fact, the leader. It's outside of the narrator just telling us that. It's like, even the fucking original story, for all its foibles, it did a better job of establishing that he was the head honcho, like with him introducing his friends and basically speaking for them, and like that did a better job of painting that image than just telling us with the narration that, yeah, this guy's the leader. Obviously, you can tell by his fucking his SS officer uniform that he wears for no reason. Randy, I don't know why I said that. Randy, the so-called leader there, was almost too shocked to move. He had quite a lot of experience in starting fights, but no real time logged in losing them. He never felt control of a situation slip. He was used to being in charge, so now, seeing one of his friends go down so quickly and easily, left him in a state of shock that he had no idea how to address. Troy, on the other hand, seemed to have a plan. Throw another punch. He moved towards Jeff deceptively fast as his weight would allow and threw two equally fast punches. Jeff, however, had no problem sidestepping both attempts. Troy, seeming lost for actions, actually dropped his own message to say, "Gee, what do I do now?" Jeff had the answer. He moved in, throwing 3 hooks to Troy's stomach. The hefty kid's eyes went as wide as pie pans. A fitting analogy, Jeff thought. That was objectively bad writing, Banning, and you should be ashamed of yourself. I shouldn't even have to explain why that is horrible writing. It's self-evident, and that was the one moment. I've been lax in my approach to criticizing this story. I've been a little bit heated, but not to the extent where I felt the need to directly address Banning or denigrate him as an author at all. But here, like, I'm actually offended. That one little segment offended me. The fact that this shit, it's just awful writing. He staggered back, clutching his throbbing stomach. Jeff wasted no time, and we're gonna get an even worse one down below. Jeff wasted no time, stepped in once more, fetching a sharp punch to the big kid's jaw, causing Joy to promptly fall on his ass. Jeff was reminded of King Hipple from the Punch-Out game he used to play. He couldn't help but smile. Okay, here's a little bit of a suggestion. A suggestion of how I think I could improve this, because as it is now, this is just a really stagnant, stupid scene that I am not the least bit invested in. And while I understand that it's also meant to, it's also serves the purpose of explaining how Jeff is so physically adept at combat, I guess. You know, he had boxing classes. It still takes away any investment I have in what happens to him. Now, what you could do here, and to get a little bit of sympathy on Jeff as in the situation he's in, so play the situation out as you did before, and Keith smacks, punches Liu. Jeff snaps. He basically he gets a adrenaline fueled rush and he starts fighting all 3 boys. But he doesn't win. And when I say he doesn't win, we still need to kind of set up the fact that Jeff still is physically intimidating enough to be a prominent threat when he actually does show up. So what you can do is have Jeff fight the 3 boys. And even though he doesn't win, he manages to hold his own enough for one of 2 things to happen. uh, Randy is he notices and he takes notice to the fact that despite them swinging and basically wailing at Jeff, he's not going down. Like he's not even dropping to a single knee, and he's still fighting back. He's still swinging, and he realizes that, oh shit, well, this ain't worth it. Let's jump him later when he's not prepared, and then we can take him off his feet that way. And they basically kind of retreat, and they kind of run with their tails between their legs, and it kind of shows that they're cowardly. And Jeff, although he's banged up, is the one that's still standing after all of it. Yeah, and it kind of puts some sympathy on Jeff, because when he comes home and he gets read the riot act from his parents, we know what he went through trying to protect his brother. He got the shit kicked out of him, and that like makes us see that Leo means a lot to Jeff, and that he's somewhat noble in that he'll take a beating to try and protect his brother from three guys. Or you can have something where, and of course, Jeff gets his licks in. He gets a few good shots in, and that's when they notice that, despite the fact that he's basically swinging against three dudes, he hits pretty damn hard. Like Jeff shouldn't be, a fucking boxer. Like maybe I think more in the lines of he's just some guy who's like fights dirty and kind of like a street brawler if he needs to be. He's just an average Joe who just snapped one day because he had a really bad day. And the other thing you could do is just have the manager of the video store run out and like shoo them off and threaten to call the cops if they don't stop fighting, and that's when Randy kind of backs off. Or she says she knows Randy and knows that he's a troublemaker, and then she says something to the effect of like, Randy Hayden, if you don't leave the premises immediately, I'm going to phone Mr. Hayden and I'll tell him what you've been doing. And that gets him to back off because he's intimidated by his dad. And, and that gives them both sides have time to lick their wounds. It gets us more emotionally invested in the fight because Jeff's not shown to be overpowered, OP, invincible, Little Mac IPO badass who can just knock the shit out of people with no trouble whatsoever. And you get a little sympathy on Jeff because he took a beating to help his brother, and he's going to get in trouble for it later on. Instead, Jeff just wins. He just beats these kids up with no trouble. There's no tension here, and it actually kind of serves to make you sympathize with Jeff even less for what comes later, because like the police come over and they're saying like, oh well, you're in trouble, kid, and we're supposed to sympathize with Jeff because Randy lied and said that Jeff started the fight, and the people were lying and saying that he started the fight. But I can't take his side because between the two of them, who came out of that conflict looking more worse for wear? Jeff looks fine. Leo has a busted, like a slight busted lip, but compared, like a bruised, like probably a bruised stomach, and like a broken jaw. Like he roughed up those kids something fierce. Like there's a way to write, like just because Jeff is in the right, that doesn't make him any more likable. Is what I'm trying to say. There's an art to it. There's a method to it. Like you can have characters who are just objectively bad people and still have them be likable. Like anyone ever seen Dilberts? Like two of my favorite characters on that show are Dogbert and Catbert respectively, and they're once a greedy, corrupt, money-hungry asshole, and the other one's just objectively evil who delights in the suffering of others. But they're still the funniest characters on the show. They're still the most likable. And, or at least as far as I'm concerned, I know there's probably some people that don't like them. But just because, the point I'm trying to make is that just because in this particular context, Jeff is in the right, that doesn't mean that we're automatically jumping to take his side. Or even a better analogy, like, those Nightmare on Elm Street films, and those Friday the 13th slasher films in general. We tend to root for the killer to come and murder the victims, and the victims, for the most part, aren't objectively bad people. Like, in Friday the 13th, what do they do that's all that bad? They smoke, drink, and party, and those aren't inherently immoral things at all. but but they come off as so annoying that we want to see them dead, despite the fact that if in real life, if you just wanted to see someone dead because they were kind of annoying, that would make you a bit of a sociopath. Now Jeff now turned his focus on Randy. He advanced on the boy, feeling something new forming inside of him. He still felt the anger, the rage actually, those two, he still felt the anger actually. That's basically what you just said. At the antics of these three assholes. They had the nerve to mess with their bikes, the nerve to insult two kids they'd never met before, and of course the ultimate offense, touching his brother. However, mixed with this rage was also a sweet, enjoyable pleasure. Not only was he kicking their asses, but he was loving every second of it. It was as though the joy of showing them up was perfectly blending with the rage he felt towards them. Together, it formed into a sadistic, controlled sense of power. That was until Liu decided to step in front of him. Jeff, that's enough! Why stop now, Liu? They wanted this. Jeff replied in a flat tone of the flat voice that Liu never heard come from his brother's mouth. She's calling the cops, look! Liu shouted again. This time, Jeff came back to reality long enough to listen. He glanced over at the video store clerk and saw her phone. Saw her on the phone, talking frantically and pointing towards the parking lot. Suddenly, Jeff's strange, sadistic haze collapsed and he regained his former self once more. That's another thing that kind of bothers me about this. And again, this kind of goes along with my idea that I had before and how much of a missed opportunity it was. Instead of just acting like this is a new and alien emotion that Jeff is going through, I think it would have been better if they had cemented the idea that Jeff has always had a chip on his shoulder and was always abrasive and kind of fight hungry, and his parents moved into the new neighborhood with the intention of, well, for one, because it's a better neighborhood and it's a nicer house and whatnot, and he's got a better job, but also for the sake of Jeff and his mental health. Like, they know that he's a boy on the edge and that he has is kind of trigger happy when it comes to his temper. And Jeff recognizes this, and the move from where they used to live kind of gives him a bit of a wake-up call that he needs to change and he needs to try to better himself. And so his reasoning for not jumping at violence comes from the fact that he doesn't want to disappoint his parents and he wants to try to start off fresh, because one of the reasons that he feels personally responsible for the move, even though that's not the entire reason why they moved to begin with, but he still feels responsible because that's one of the primary reasons that they gave him that that kind of lingers within his mind. And that would also make the parents more likable, and that also would be better for the story if the parents weren't actually generically obnoxious assholes who don't care about his well-being. Like, if they actually did care about his health and his mental health, and they knew that he had a chip on his shoulder, and actually then they were actually trying to do something about it and help him, because it would add a layer of tragedy to what is to come. And right now, like, this could be just Jeff kind of relapsing into what he used to do back in New Orleans. And it also make Jeff a lot more likable because he knows he has a problem and he's trying his best to de-escalate the situation and trying to come to a peaceful, trying to go take the path of least resistance. But he kind of falls flat and he kind of falls back into his old way, despite the fact that he's obviously trying as hard as he can to be different and change. And instead, here is just all of a sudden, despite the narration kind of indicating that Jeff already has fought a few times, this is the first time he's ever fought, apparently against people he didn't like, and apparently against people who made him angry. And it's also the first time that he ever got into just a kick out of it. And, like, it just kind of happens out of nowhere. Like, even the original story, Jeff's the feeling of the desire to cause harm comes up from a very minor thing, and it sets up the fact that Jeff has it in him, kind of almost ingrained in him already. Like, when they're introduced to the little kid, whatever his fucking name was, from next door neighbor, and his mother basically chides him for wanting to not be with, go to the party. Jeff, after that, Jeff is in his bedroom and he's still upset about it, and he feels that anger boiling up within him, and it kind of sets up what's to come. Here is like that sets up the fact that it's kind of always been there, and here it's just this is literally the first time, and it really makes no sense, and we don't really know Jeff enough as a character to where we can understand if this is a contrast or this is out of character for him. Like the it goes back to what I said before. The first chapter should have been dedicated to introducing us to Jeff as a character, as a person, and like having us understand his mental state. And then when this happens, we understand that the shit is starting to hit the fan, because this is something that we either come to expect or we cut that kind of takes us off guard or catches us off guard. Fuck, let's go, Jeff stated quickly, and he and Liu mounted their bikes and rode towards the parking lot exit. Yeah, you better fucking run, Randy called behind them. Jeff and Liu paid no mind and pedaled away. A few blocks down the street, they dismantled their bikes and began walking together. At first, neither brother spoke. Then Liu broke the silence. Jeff, thank you for standing up back there. Thank you. Yeah, those guys were pieces of shit. They had it coming, Jeff replied, looking down the street as they walked. What happened? I never seen you like that before? I don't know why that's a question. I pronounced that I phrased that correctly, by the way. For some reason, I never seen you like that before is in the form of a question. So I guess Liu is a Valley Girl now. Just defending myself, Liu. What was I supposed to do? Let them beat you up? I bet they go to our school. I bet we'll see them again there, and they won't forget of this. Who cares? We didn't ask to move here. We didn't ask for any of this. Mom and Dad just wanted a bigger house and a nicer neighborhood. How dare they want to increase the standard of living around them? Those fucking assholes. Like, let's stay in our one bedroom apartment, living in squalor, and having to piss in the fucking outhouse that we had to nail to the wall. That was much nicer, Liu. And we were along for the ride, whether we like it or not. Think I give a shit what these rich asshole kids could think of us? Jeff stated as he went back to looking at his feet. That would resonate with me a lot better if we had seen them interacting with the neighborhood, and we, as the readers, I'm repeating myself now, but it's like moments like this should come after, like, longer bits sections of them getting shit on by their community, so it really hits home how frustrated Jeff is. Like, okay, like here's the events of the story thus far, and as we've read, they moved to a new neighborhood, they went to a video store, and they got into a fist fight. That's all that's happened. Like, I can understand writing like this if you're under like a time constraint. I guess you could say he was, because this was for a contest, so there probably had to be a point in time where you had to submit this. But this is just so rushed and ham-fisted. It just, like, again, it's one of those things where, like, oh, well, this neighborhood sucks and everyone looks down on us. Okay, well, I didn't fucking see it. Think we'll get in trouble? Leo asked. For what, defending ourselves? Yeah, I guess you're right. They did start it, Leo answered, and to the brothers, the matter was closed. However, things were far from over, and that's the second chapter of Just a Killer 2015. Overall, I disliked it even more than the first chapter. This is the moment where the conflict has been introduced, and the conflict falls completely flat because I do not care about what happens to the main characters. Again, first chapter, set up their character and introduce it to the setting, have them interact with the setting, and then everything is established, then you introduce a conflict, and I don't know, like, I call them conflict, but really, Jeff and, like, Toby, Keith, and, was it Toby? Yeah, Toby, Keith, and Roy? I need to look at the thing again, because it was Randy. These, as far as antagonists go, so far, like, yeah, it really does get you invested in what's happening with the story when you portray the oncoming threat as a deliberate joke who only serve to emphasize just how badass Jeff is. It really does get me invested in what happens to the characters, and seeing Jeff in this situation, like later on, later on, and I'm kind of skipping ahead a bit. Later on, they're in this situation where Jeff is in like trapped with these three boys, and it's facing him, basically facing him down. And there's no tension in the situation because in the earlier scene, you already seen he can kick their ass like it's no problem. There's no tension here. And what are we supposed to think, that Jeff's badass? I don't, because it's just fucking emo dipshit, dickhead who keeps it real, yo. Like, fuck these rich folks. I keeps it real, homie. So this, yeah, this was not good. Hopefully, I keep saying this, but I'm lying. I've already read this story, so I keep trying to say like maybe the next one will be better, even though I know it doesn't get better. Uh, but yeah, you know, tell me what you guys thought of it. Do you think I'm being a little too harsh? How would you write this if you were at the helm and could rewrite this story? And when I say rewrite this story, I mean this particular iteration of Jeff the Killer. Um, there's a lot that could have been done from what I see, that could have really served to improve the standard of the writing, but I don't know. Like as it is, this is just really falling flat. But yeah. So this is Vince 12 signing out. Y'all have a good one. Like, comment, subscribe, and all that shit. And okay, if you want to suggest any stories, feel free to suggest it in the discussion page of my channel, because I don't know. I don't get. I don't really get suggestions that often, so, or at least I don't as many as I used to. So I think that would be cool. So y'all have a good one, and good night.